My name is Jean Atkinson. I'm the Executive Director of Clinic, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network. And I really appreciate those of you who are able to stay and join us. We're looking forward to having a great conversation this afternoon for about an hour with you all. There have been a lot of great conversations about mobilizing to defend immigrants and deportation defense. On this panel, kind of like the last one, Playing to Win, we want to take it on the offense. Matthew Burnett, the director of the Immigrant Advocates Network, and I are going to make the case that we have a legalization program that we can implement right now, a program that does not require legislation and does not require administrative action. Brian Schaefer, who very generously stepped in at the last minute to help us fill a void, is the Senior Director of Immigration and Legal Services at the YMCA International Services here in Houston. Brian is going to talk a little bit about screening on the ground, both in detention centers and outside of detention centers. And then Sarah Feldman, who is the project director of Ready, California, of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center, is going to talk about naturalization, another program that's going on nationally where we can be protecting immigrants and strengthening our community. And then finally, Astrid Dominguez, who also stepped in at the last minute, and so both Brian and Astrid deserve our thanks, and you don't have bios in your program for them, but as I found out, you can Google them both if you want to know. Astrid is a policy strategist for immigrant rights at the ACLU in Texas. Astrid is actually going to be wearing kind of a different hat, though, as she talks with us today. She's going to be talking with us about her experience working on the border in the Rio Grande Valley and some work with the Mexican consulates. And so we hear all the time at these kinds of conferences that not everyone is from New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco, Chicago, Houston, right? And so I think Astrid's going to be that voice to talk about some of the challenges agencies face when they're not in a heavily resourced area. So as you can see by Matthew's first slide, for a very long time now, based on anecdotal evidence and some surveying of community-based nonprofits that we did with Center for Migration Studies and National Immigrant Justice Center, we have believed that there are a large number of unauthorized immigrants who actually are eligible for an immigration benefit. They may not have known it or not been able to pursue it, but they are eligible. So this year, Clinic was able to fund 16 of our affiliates, these are member agencies in the South, to conduct legal screenings to determine whether people had affirmative or defensive benefits available to them, at least potentially. Of course, these are screenings. These screenings were done in conjunction with Know Your Rights presentations. We did it with the Know Your Rights presentations for a couple of reasons. We wanted people to come in, and we wanted people to come in even if they didn't think they were eligible for something. So by having them come for a Know Your Rights screening, we were bringing in the broadest possible audience. But most importantly, we wanted everyone, whether you're eligible for something or not, to leave with some information that would be valuable. And so I think we were able to do that with those screenings. In about 2 months or so, the 16 agencies screened more than 3,000 people. And Dr. Tom Wong, who's an associate professor at University of California in San Diego, analyzed the results. Dr. Wong found that approximately 15.4% of the people screened were eligible for an immigration benefit. These were all different kinds of benefits, of course. We screened for many, but U visas for victims of violence, family-based, asylum, even, as I said, some that would come out in deportation proceedings like non-LPR cancellation of removal. We also found many individuals who were citizens or likely citizens. So across the US South, we did the screenings in 7 states. People came from 9 states for those screenings. This would equate to about 600,000 people. Dr. Wong is going to continue to do analysis as we get more information from the rest of the country. And he expects that that 15.4% number will hold or may even be a little bit higher based on the demographics of the people that he did analyze. So now nationwide, we're talking about probably about 1.6 million people. And then just as a point of reference, in the last major legalization law in our country, the Immigration Reform and Control Act, in the general legalization program, benefited about 1.6 million people. There were an additional million farm workers under the SAW program. But so what that means is that we have something that we can do right now. I think the other piece of this that's really important is by talking to people about their options, maybe even particularly in defense, right? If you get picked up, what might happen in deportation proceedings, we're empowering people so that they're not waiving their rights and accepting a quick removal when they may actually have eligibility. But this also points to the issue of this aggressive enforcement, which means that we are deporting people who have legal options in the United States, and we've been doing it for a long time. But now we have the facts behind us to support that this is what's happening, there is a program, and we need to step up and start serving these individuals. So Matthew, I'm going to put to you.
Good afternoon. It's the last session. You're almost done. One more. Okay, one more. So I think it's really important just to take a minute and pause and reflect on what Jean has just said, which is there's a legalization program of 1.5 million people available to us right now without any kind of legislative or other rulemaking. That is a pretty incredible opportunity, and it's one that we're really not talking a lot about in this field. And so I hope this panel and the work that that CMS and Jean and others are doing really gets amplified. So the question that I'm going to try to answer is, what do we do with that information? So that's not, that's 15% of 11 million, and to screen effectively, we need to try to reach all of the 11 million. And so about a year and a half ago, we started work on a new tool called IMI. IMI is an online platform in English and in Spanish. It's in plain language, written at the 5th grade reading level, that screens for common immigration benefits. In addition to the screening that it provides, we have a learning center that provides plain language explainers on different immigration benefits, as well as know your rights information, how to work with a lawyer, how to avoid notarial fraud. It also has a National Legal Services Directory. So many of you are aware, because we call you every year to get your updates, that we maintain a database of about 1,000 nonprofit legal service providers and offices around the country, and we track about 50 different data points so that we can actually provide targeted referrals to folks. If they're potentially eligible for asylum, we can actually connect them to the folks in their community that do asylum work, et cetera. The reason, or the focus, the goals of IMI really are to help immigrants to understand their rights and their legal options, to provide quality and trustworthy plain language information. We did a recent review of Know Your Rights resources about 3 months ago and found that many were written between the 10th and 12th grade reading level. So this is Know Your Rights, community-based flyers and other information. Really, as a field, we've got to move into thinking about how to produce plain language information, because if folks aren't able to understand it, particularly folks with limited literacy, it's really having zero impact. We also wanted to help folks to be informed consumers of legal services, so not just to avoid fraud, but to know what to ask their attorney or DOJ or accredited representative, to understand that relationship and to protect their interests as a consumer. We also wanted to leverage limited resources. Obviously, we're not going to be able to screen the 11 million independent of ways like IMI as a field. Our capacity is limited by resources and staff and even volunteer constraints, and so we really wanted to find ways that included and integrated fully the great work that we're doing as a field. And obviously my organization is a network of 5,000 of us who provide direct services and other services to immigrant communities. And then also to connect people to trusted nonprofit providers that were vetted. So minimally, they have to have an attorney on staff or be BIA recognized. And finally, to help clients to prepare for the work that they need to do with lawyers and DOJ reps. So far, we've had 60,000 unique users. We launched in January. And of the 30,000 that have used the screening tool, 6,000 found potential relief. So it's very much in line with the numbers that Dawn and Jean found in their research. It's not a sure thing, obviously. It's an online tool that isn't able to exercise the same discretion as a human being, but it's the first step, and that's really a lot of the focus of the way that we message this, is there is a step for you to take to understand your potential eligibility, to know your rights, to find a legal service provider. You don't have to exist in despair. There's ways that you can access 24/7 on your smartphone, which are nearly ubiquitous among the communities that we're serving, resources and screening and other opportunities to move you forward. Some data, and I'll just go through this really quickly. So about 64% of our users are between 25 and 44 years old. Users are evenly split between genders, and about 50% of our users were born in Mexico, and then what follows from there, more or less what you would expect. 62% of users are currently undocumented, and about 27% of our sessions come from users who have their browser set to Spanish. So we're definitely targeting the right communities. We're learning a lot more about how folks are using the tool, and this data ultimately we're selected for a partnership with an organization called DataKind, which is actually going to help us to dig into this significant database or data set and understand more about not only kind of how the tool is having impact, but also ways in which we can better target our interventions and outreach and community engagement. About 55% of sessions come from mobile devices, so that's I think probably obvious to many of us here that our clients are accessing the web through a mobile device as opposed to a desktop. And there are no significant differences between completion rate among age groups or country of origin. I think Indians had a slightly lower completion rate, but beyond that, it's more or less the same. So just a little bit about our strategy and our model. So one of the core tenets of our model is that we have to move beyond this lawyer-based, one-on-one individual model. That's not going to allow us to scale. We simply cannot scale. In the civil legal services context, with a huge investment from the federal government through LSC, at least for now, and lots of other resources, still 80% of individuals in the United States who have legal needs, those needs are unmet. So that would, in that context, involve a 5-fold increase in lawyers to have 100% access to justice. It's probably even more significant of a difference in the immigration legal services context. And so we want to look at navigators, at educators, at librarians, at social workers, at all of the folks who have natural day-to-day interactions with immigrant communities, and empower them through Emmy and other tools to be able to help the folks that they're working with to understand what their legal options are, know what their rights are, and to find trusted legal help. Some of the models that we're using Emmy for are group presentations, so integrating it into Know Your Rights presentations, having folks use their personal phones in those settings, so they just take their phone out of their pocket and go along and see whether they're eligible. And then some folks are using computer labs or other existing community technology infrastructure. So that could be at a library, that could be at a school. There are lots of places where even if you at your own organization don't have computers, you'll have clients, patrons, students who can leverage the infrastructure that's available at those places. And then finally, some of, I think, the most innovative outreach methods have been sort of one-on-one outreach, particularly to rural and underserved areas, where you have folks who are working in those communities using Emmy to help people do screening and then connecting them to nearby or sometimes not so nearby legal service providers. And then because of the enforcement regime and just the fear that's in our communities, also thinking about how to integrate them into house meetings and smaller group settings where people feel more safe about not being the target of enforcement. So that's it. I'm happy to answer questions here. Obviously, you can always email support@emmy.org. We have field support coordinators and trainers, folks who help work with you on community engagement and partnerships to amplify Emmy and leverage it in your work. And I look forward to the conversation.
Brian, tell us what you're doing.
I'm actually going to go in a little different direction and talk about lawyer screening for relief. So, one of the things a couple of years ago that really struck me when DACA happened was the organization I work at, we did probably 200 to 300 DACA applications. And during those applications, we came across between 6 and 12 U.S. citizens, kids who believed they were undocumented, and through the course of doing their DACA application, we learned they were U.S. citizens. These aren't people we found during the screening. These are people that, again, during the DACA application, we didn't do a workshop model. We did a lot of one-on-one, and it was mostly during just conversations, like, where your parents live, and we came across, again, 6 to 12, and that was really surprising to me. I mean, you had no idea that would happen. So from there, I'm going to move in and say, what the lesson we learned from that is we need to be looking at screenings and looking at trying to find things that we're not thinking of, like trying to open our minds to other relief. If you do a DACA screening and you're only looking for DACA, you're only going to see DACA. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about how we've developed that in some of our programs and, how it happens and how you can do it. So to talk about that, I'm going to talk about some detained programs that we do. We do a legal orientation program where we do Know Your Rights presentations, and following that we do individual orientation/consultations with people where we're doing an intake, we're doing evaluation. In the detention context, you have some disadvantages that everything's moving really fast. They may have a hearing in 2 or 3 weeks. You have to find a solution, and you have to find it fast. You may not have help from family getting things and that sort of thing, but so you're relying on the person in front of you, which when you're doing a screening, you often are. And then the other disadvantage with the detention is the client's always focused on getting out of detention. They're not focusing on the best solution to their problem. So, we have clients who, they want to be bonded out, and the best solution to their problem may be to stay detained and win their case. That's a dilemma, and it kind of plays in the same thing when you're doing a screening. Your client has one thing in mind, and you're trying to think of the best solution. Now, the advantages of detention is it moves fast, so you can get a solution quickly. You can work on your problem. Then there's more options on the table because your client's in removal proceedings. So when you're doing a person who's not in removal proceedings, you might come across the greatest cancellation, non-LPR cancellation in the world, but if they're not in removal proceedings, you don't have a case. In detained cases, they're always in detention. We have all the options on the table, and then they're more desperate. We all have done screenings where people have, they have a way to get a green card, but they're going to keep pushing it off for later. Once they get detained, they're desperate. They're going to go with that relief. And the other great advantage to detention is the client's focused on their case. Their life's not getting in the way, which plays into what I just said, that they may have had a solution that they could have pursued. Now they're detained. They need to pursue it. When we think about doing a screening with those things in mind, it really affects the outcome that we're going to get from a screening. The thing that we developed on developing our screening mechanism for detained cases is the first thing you need to do is you need to know the law and know why you're asking every question you're going to ask. It's ideal to have a screening tool that asks all the questions you need to ask to address statutory eligibility. And by doing this, you also need to learn obscure areas of the law, like NACARA, derivative citizenship claims, even 245I is coming, as the years go by, it's becoming, less common. But knowing those areas of laws will help you develop a good screening tool because you'll know the questions to ask. So as you develop a good intake, again, all you want to focus on is statutory eligibility on your screening. Don't think about anything else, just statutory eligibility. And then you want to train your staff or train yourself as to why you're asking a question and all the possible scenarios that could come from that question. So, for instance, if I'm doing a screening at a detention center, one of the questions I ask is I go through family, like, what's your parents' immigration status? How many children do you have? What's their immigration status? And all that's leading me to certain things. But a question like a parent's immigration status, they may tell me their parent's a U.S. citizen. Okay, well, when did your parent become a U.S. citizen? Because now I'm thinking, oh, maybe you have a derivative citizenship claim. Maybe you have hardship for cancellation. Maybe you have all these things. But the other thing is, again, this goes back to knowing the obscure law. I'm thinking, when did your parent become a citizen? And they say, oh, about 5 years ago. Okay, well, when did your parent get their green card? And then when you go on, you lead yourself to maybe it's a 245I case and you can get around an illegal entry and do an adjustment. Those are the type of things, one question, which is a simple question, what's your parents' immigration status, is going to lead you down all kind of scenarios. And again, if you're having staff do these, it's important for them to know why the question's there. It's not just a matter of fact. One of the things that we have a problem with sometimes, it gets back to that example with DACA, is you meet keep it in mind, we do these intakes after a Know Your Rights presentation, and somebody comes up and all they want to talk about is cancellation. So you start the sheet and you start skipping over things because you're trying to find their questions to their cancellation, but you may have better relief. You may have something else on the table that you're not thinking of. Which leads me to this, is complete the whole intake. Ask all your questions so you can address every possible solution. This comes into play when you're doing removal cases, because you may think you have the greatest relief in the world, and something happens that cuts it off. It's a stop time issue, or it's some other issue that comes up that, okay, I thought I was going that route, it's not going to happen. What's my backup route? If you complete the whole intake, you can often just look at your intake sheet and say, okay, that's not going to work now, I found a different solution. Okay. I said this already, and then I'll say it again. Focus on statutory eligibility, not the client. Okay, that's a really hard thing to do. You're thinking this client's a good guy, a bad guy, a nice guy, a mean guy. It's such a sad case. It's a run-of-the-mill case. You're thinking all these things when you're doing an intake, but in reality, you want to just think about statutory eligibility, because I find that if you think about the other things, it clouds your judgment. You start, he might not be statutorily eligible. I mean, he's got a sad story, but if he's not statutorily eligible, it's not going to matter. So you really have to almost not think of the person. You're just thinking of the statute. Then this is a problem a lot of people have. I think Francis made a statement earlier about in the detain concept, often people think of these as bad guys and everything. Get to the point of, okay, what's the statutory eligibility issue? Like, why is a person not statutorily eligible? Is there a way to fix that? Okay, so maybe they have a crime and you can look at it and on the face you're like, oh, it's a CIMT, he's not eligible. Oh, it's an ag felony, he's not eligible. It's a particular serious crime. Whatever the crime issue is there a way around that? Do you have an argument on that person being statutorily eligible? We're not talking about discretion right now. We're just talking about statutory eligibility. You're thinking about solutions. The other thing is, stop time rules. When you come up with like cancellation for LPRs, there may be an argument you have that they were previously admitted years before that you can use to get around the stop time issue. But find the statutory eligibility issue and then look for the way around it. Then at that point, after you've done it, then you ask yourself, do I want to represent this client? Is it a sympathetic case? Will discretion play a factor? And the reason I bring that up, that's the only point that I want to bring that up. I don't want to think about that early on. There are advantages as a practitioner to going through the analysis I was just talking about, because you may get to the end and decide, I don't want this case. This case isn't a good case. This case isn't a winner. But if you've come up with a strategy in the future that's going to work for somebody else becoming statutory eligible, you've really improved your screening process. So again, that's how we do it. We just have a front and page back screening thing, and we're going through every possible situation you could think of in terms of relief. We're addressing citizenship claims, we're addressing readjustment, we're addressing cancellation, we're addressing persecution-based relief, we're addressing TPS, DACARA, everything. And if you looked at the screening thing without knowing the law and knowing how it's implemented, you'd think there's no way you're covering all of that, because you're just asking simple questions that the person knows the answer to instead of asking them questions that they're not going to know the answer to. Yeah. And that's over you.
Well, thanks everyone for being here this afternoon. As Jean mentioned, I'm with the Immigrant Legal Resource Center based in San Francisco. We're a national organization. And among other things, we lead the New Americans Campaign, which is a cross-sector national campaign with the goal of getting as many lawful permanent residents as possible to naturalize. Jean and Matthew were both talking about big numbers in terms of folks who are undocumented but eligible for other forms of relief and the importance of screening those folks. Well, we've got big numbers when it comes to lawful permanent residents as well who are eligible for citizenship. We're looking at over 8 million people nationally, and at the same time, under 1 million naturalized each year. So that's another big opportunity to exploit. So the New Americans campaign has been active since 2011. Works with over 140 partners throughout the state through 18 sites, including Houston, and I know some of our NAC partners are in the room or have been here these couple of days with us. And to date, the NAC or New Americans campaign has helped folks to complete and submit over 250,000 applications. So it's really impressive. But to get to what we're thinking about now in our new context, what are we seeing in the naturalization space these days in the run-up to the presidential election in 2016, and under the new administration? And what we've seen is really an explosion in demand, a huge increase in demand. Per USCIS numbers, 950,000 applications in fiscal year 2016, up from a recent average of 750 to 850,000. So considerable. And there's always expected to be, a bump in an election year, especially a big high-stakes election like this one. But this bump was a lot higher than typically in a presidential election year. And interestingly, that demand for naturalization services and increase in application rates has been sustained. Interestingly, even after it would have been too late if you apply for citizenship to be able to register to vote in the 2016 presidential election, folks can continue to apply. So we'll talk a little bit about why. So you can see from these numbers that the experience nationwide and in general in application rates was also reflected in the experiences of our New Americans campaign partners. You can see quarter by quarter from the end of 2015 and the first 2 quarters of 2016, that last bar there is the number of applications completed at NAC sites throughout the country, and it's way up. This is a 30% increase over the previous fiscal year. We also see an even bigger growth in the group processing collaborative workshops that are the centerpiece of the New Americans campaign model. And that's something that Matthew mentioned as well with respect to general legal screenings. And as many of you know, the group processing model are these larger, say 30-person up to 500, 600-person events that leverage community resources like volunteers, space, food, et cetera, media coverage, in order to really increase efficiency and be able to serve more people with fewer legal services representatives. But at the same time, providing those high-quality services, naturalization legal services, through attorneys and BIA-accredited reps who are doing the pieces that only they can do, while other actors do the pieces that they're expert in, like outreach, volunteer coordination, et cetera. So these workshops have really, the 60%, almost 60% increase in the last year in workshops across the country at NAC sites have really enabled the number of applications to be even higher without a commensurate increase in spending or in capacity. So a really interesting piece here is a shift in motivation. Typically, there have been surveys, focus groups over the years and recent years around what gets people to want to become citizens and take the step of naturalizing if they're eligible. And typically, things like better job opportunities, increased earnings, and civic participation, being able to vote. But we've seen an increase and then some new motivators as well. An increased desire to vote not just in the 2016 presidential election, but because of the results of that election, folks feeling like, I really wish I could have voted and maybe had some impact on that outcome, but I didn't because even though I was eligible, I wasn't a citizen. So that's an oft-cited reason for seeking this out now. A new one, very sadly, is fear of deportation. A lot of lawful permanent residents are realizing because of the executive orders, because of the travel ban, and others, that they are at risk. That the only way that they can be afforded full protection from deportation is to become a citizen. And so while that's an unfortunate realization, it is something that as service providers and advocates, we need to take advantage of that motivation to get more people to naturalize. There's also the fear of not being able to return from travel. And both of those are, again, a real sea change because previously, folks who were eligible and seeking to naturalize said that they felt a sense of belonging in the United States, and that's unfortunately not the case anymore for many people. So what do we need to do? As I was saying, seize this moment. There's a real sense of urgency, which we don't necessarily know how long it's going to last, and so we need to take advantage of that and use this one-time intervention that enables people to be protected for life and potentially their minor children as well. And it also has long-term repercussions and benefits electorally and in terms of building the power of immigrant communities. So there are things that a number of different sectors can do now to take advantage of this protection, of this remedy. As we mentioned, workshops, so the group processing model, increasing those numbers, clearly increasing those also increases the number of applications and leverages scarce resources. Funders can also help organizations build capacity. Unlike, as we heard yesterday and during other panels, some legal services capacity is really difficult to scale up quickly to respond to emerging threats and challenges, like that for deportation defense and some other forms of relief. But adding more BIA accredited reps, leveraging more volunteers in the community, that's something that with a minimal investment, folks can do a lot more. Also increasing USCIS capacity to process applications. Unfortunately, because of this increase in demand, applications are now taking about 8 to 9 months to process as opposed to 5 months on average beforehand. So that's another important piece. And then anybody in a community, any business, other entities can donate space, food, volunteers, etc., to help enable more people to apply and be supported to do so. So I will end there. Look forward to having a discussion with you all after our last panelist presents.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Jen, for including me in this panel. And this is a very important conversation. As Jen mentioned, I'm with the ACLU of Texas. I recently moved to Houston. I was running the border office over there, in which we have a community organizer, an investigator reporter. And from the work and experience that we have there, that we've encountered, this is one major challenge. The Rio Grande Valley, it's Cameron County and Hidalgo County are the poorest counties in the U.S. So the lack of services that this region faces is incredible. I've worked with tremendous and amazing organizations in the Valley. There's an amazing network of organizations that are doing God's work, that are doing immigration work, that are doing education work. They are working in health, they're working in jobs, and they've really mobilized and helped the community. But there's this other component of the lack of legal services, and not because there isn't attorneys. We do have few certified immigration attorneys. I think we have around 5 for the entire area, which is around 1 million. So it is, we're short of attorneys. We do a great, we do a lot of work with our AILA chapter in South Texas, but again, there isn't enough for the need. And there's the legal services provider like ProBar, Trala, TCRP, the Young Center, but they're also limited in capacity or exactly how they can help the community. So often we turn, many of these folks turn to the notarios, like Andrea said yesterday, and that's a main challenge because we're trying to help people, and where do we refer them if there isn't an organization that can, serve that need, or they can't afford it either. So the challenges we've seen, people detained, they can't afford an attorney. And we turn to the consulates. The consulates try to do their best to provide and serve that need. But, the lack is there. I mean, the hole is there. And what I've learned throughout these conferences, the amazing work that is done in Houston. And how do we take this to the Rio Grande Valley or other rural areas? Because I'm sure this isn't, the Valley is not the only area that lacks this type of services. And today that I heard Matt and Sarah, talk about these tools that we can take to the community. And in the Rio Grande Valley, the community is all about empowering themselves and teaching people how to do stuff for themselves so that, they don't have to rely on the organizations to do it. Now, when it comes to legal, of course, we can't, but there are ways that we can train the community that, they can learn and they can serve their own people. Other thing that we've seen besides, and we thought, yesterday when I was in the breakout, and that's when Jean approached me. I've been giving a lot of thought, even though the ACLU unfortunately doesn't do direct representation. But how else, how do I bring this to the border? How do I bring this to rural communities? The collaborative is a great example of, what organizations united can do to pretty much defend these immigrants that right now they're targeted. And at the border, that is the main challenge because by the time you find out somebody was detained, probably they had already been deported. So they don't even have that chance of, let me go find an attorney. Let me go find someone that can help this person. And, thinking about deportation defense, how do we, the community really wants to do what Arizona did and stand in front of the buses and just, stand in front of the port of entry and stand in front of the detention center. And that's great. But then the other part is, okay, if these activists get arrested, who's gonna bail them out? And where do we get the money from? Where do we get the money to do that? So there's different conversations that are happening. And, ideas of, a collaborative, right? But also taking people to the border. And I heard in a previous panel say, go to the border tomorrow. That's exactly right. People need to see the need at the border. There isn't any attorneys. If you go to Port Isabel Detention Center, you'll see ProBar, and my God, they do a lot of work, but they wish they could represent and help every single individual that it's there, that's detained, but they really can't. So bringing attorneys to the border, we don't have a law school. There is another, we don't have clinics that, sometimes UT goes, and they, I think every summer there's, in coordination with TCRP or ProBar, we have people that go down to the border. But the need is there. So I've heard a lot of, I've seen a lot of energy from attorneys to want, that want to do something and want to help. And this is a thought I've had, why don't we go to the border? Why don't we show you what the need is? The region. Why don't we connect you with the people that are already working with the members, that are already, could definitely flag the cases that, the people that either they can get some relief or can become citizens. Some organizations do citizenship workshops, and they already do this type of work with USCIS. But in terms of people that want relief and they have no idea they're actually eligible for it. I have this dream of let's take the attorneys to the border, right? And this is on my non-ACLU hat, but it's important for people to realize and understand what's happening. You know, block clinics, but also how do we, creating a fund, and I think Raices has been great at this for the families at Carnes. They've been able to put together funds so they can bail people out of detention. And that is one main challenge, and the attorneys that are doing this work probably know better than I do, that the amount, now that the bails are like going up, and people can't leave detention. So how do also, when we talk about funders, also bringing the funders' attention. They do, many of these organizations are funded and to do social work, but what about the defense of all these immigrants that are at potential risk of being deported? And now that's, we've heard all about, Trump's executive orders, wanting to ramp up enforcement, but now on top of that we have SB4. And we've seen the collaboration, the informal collaboration that's already happening at the board, that was already happening, and that that it will continue because of SB4. And what that means for the community. The community is scared, and the community is wanting to, they're finding ways, and very creative ways of protecting each other and defending their own community. But the legal component is key for this, for us to be able to prevent separation of families from from our community members being deported. So I appreciate the time and opportunity that Jen gave me to just share this idea with y'all. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Astrid gave a very stark example of what we see at the border. But as you all know, coming from different places around the country, this could be rural California, Washington State, Mississippi. We have these issues of lack of resources all over the country. I think, listening to Brian talk about the kind of the nuts and bolts of screening highlighted how complex it can be and how serious it is. But you heard from both Sarah and Matthew that there are models out there that can help us expand the service. I think the idea that everyone can play a part, we just need to be smart and figure out what role should each, I was gonna say person, but clearly technology is a person in this space as well. What role should each person play? The panelists, we all decided that we'd really love to have this as a conversation because we've got some great experts sitting next to me right here, but we also have a lot of great experts out here as well. So we'd love to hear from you what models are working. Again, the numbers are daunting, right? We want to screen 11 million people, help 8 million people, or as many who want to become citizens, provide representation to the 1.5 million or so who need it. And those numbers are going to be changing all the time. So that's daunting, but what's working in your communities, what ideas you have, how do we reach those under-resourced areas or ethnic communities that aren't applying for benefits at the level that they could? So these folks may start having this conversation while you come up, but we'd love you to come up to the microphone and give us your ideas.
To repeat what Jean said, it would be great to learn from you all in terms of what's working. In my role at the ILRC, I lead a project called Ready California, and we've pivoted from thing to thing as the context has changed. We originally came together as a statewide collaborative campaign to prepare the state and support service providers for comprehensive immigration reform in 2013. That didn't happen. We were getting ready for DAPA and expanded DACA, also building up those networks, building capacity in the state. That didn't happen. Make a long story short, we're now focusing on supporting organizations to get information about constitutional rights through Know Your Rights presentations, information about family preparedness, and also general legal screenings like we've talked about here. So I can just say that some of the things some of our partners have reported in terms of how they're getting folks to come out, or what kind of models are working now in terms of the sort of general legal screenings. It's different than saying come out to apply for DACA or come out to apply for naturalization. But I think there's been some success in just a couple of points I'll note. One being this sort of issue bundling, going to where people are and going to where folks are, as I say, piggybacking on a health fair or combining with other kinds of information. Food banks, especially in rural areas, is something that we've seen. Also combining the sort of general legal checkup, billing it as going to come in for a legal checkup, citing those numbers, the 14.5, there are other things you may be eligible for, and sort of billing it that way, but also combining, like if there's a group processing event, doing something that is maybe DACA renewals, naturalization, and a legal screening, or going to a rural area, know your rights plus screenings and consultations. So I think those are some of the pieces that stand out for me. I think also the family preparedness piece. Our partners have been getting so many questions about family preparedness, and so really kind of leaning on that, come out to figure out how to make a plan to keep your family safe, and then building a screening piece into that. Also financial preparation as well. So those are some ideas that come to me. I don't know if other folks here or in the room have thoughts as well.
I'm not sure that I have other ideas, but we do have a place where we teach English as a second language and citizenship, arts and crafts, computers, Zumba, community building, period. Okay, and it is considered a church, which is I'm going with the sensitive locations piece, that's okay to invite people to come to be present for any kind of a talk because of the fear. ICE may be parked in the parking lot just waiting for those people, and so they don't want to show up. What my question would be to Astrid, you perked my curiosity by saying, we need the legal people, but really the community wants to have their own power and knows how to protect themselves. Could you speak more to that?
Sure. So, I mean, this network that we work with, they were created in 2005, and part of it is precisely to, teach them how to advocate for themselves, and that's in many, not just on immigration, but immigration's a main issue, and part of what we're very involved is the Know Your Rights component of it. And so we work with this, there's 10 member core organizations, but that serve, around 50,000 people in the Valley, more or less. And we do these workshops, Know Your Rights, but our organizer has created this network of volunteers. And we're actually inspired in the health promotora model. So, these women that go out there, door to door, and, are helping the community and bringing, resources and health services. So what we came up with that was working in other regions already, but, in the Valley it wasn't there. So we have a network of civil rights promoters, pretty much. So we are training members of the community to be leaders in their own colonias or in their own neighborhoods, and we are also giving them teaching them how to organize their communities so they're leaders themselves. So they we only have one organizer for the entire Valley, and that's like a very big place. So we're thinking if we can have people that can do these for themselves or for their own communities, we're giving them the tools to fight. And the network just, they met this Thursday, and they sent me an email and said, we're going to start doing the barrio defense. So, which is similar, know your rights, but also they're really considering civil disobedience. They have this Facebook closed groups on Facebook, so everybody alerts everybody. We're Border Patrol station, so like if you live in a certain part and you see Border Patrols, like don't come out. I mean, they have to survive, and they find a way to survive in a highly militarized zone, because the valley, it's highly militarized. You have the state troopers, you have a lot of federal agents, and then you have on top of that local law enforcement. So people just get very creative. I remember when DPS had started to put checkpoints in 2000, was it 13? It was like, remember walkie-talkies kind of thing? So there was an app, they downloaded it and they shared it, and there was a person that was just receiving calls and saying like where the DPS checkpoints were. That way people could avoid. I mean, so the community finds ways to defend themselves, and I think right now at this moment they are really considering stepping it up and doing what Arizona has done. And I think Chris Newman mentioned it when what they have been doing. Like just sitting in front of the bus and not letting it, go through, so they, prevent or at least stop that deportation. So that's right now what they're thinking. But then, there's consequence to that. So the community is really trying to do this strategically and in a smart way. That way, it doesn't put the community at risk.
Hi, I wanted to raise a question, and it was alluded a little bit to it. So much of the past 2 days were geared towards Spanish-speaking immigrants, and there is a large population who are not Spanish speakers. So I'm thinking about the information that you said is available in Spanish and English, and you were concerned that it's an 11th grade or 12th grade level. We also have especially large refugee populations who are eligible to become U.S. citizens. Clearly, I became a U.S. citizen exactly because of these things, because of fear of deportation, and just because I was worried not being able to come back. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that I have been working for years with refugees, and also there's this looming fact. It's not just there is a lot of African refugees, and they're targeted because of their race and because of their immigration status. And so my question to this panel is, what are your goals to broaden this, to make this broader than just the Spanish-speaking community? Because if you're talking about all the people who can be naturalizing, you're overlooking large pockets of populations. And I just wanted to share something, what I've been actually doing with the community. So I'm a professor, but I have also worked with refugees for years, and this one particular community I've been working for years with is the Liberian refugee community in Staten Island. And there is, for example, a Spanish-speaking community there, but they actively exclude the Africans. That's not surprising. So the Africans have basically started their own organization, and they have been very much supporting their own efforts to make sure that a lot of the elderly women become U.S. citizens, and I send my students to become, basically to be their volunteers. So I'm interested to see what it is that you are doing, because I don't see anything that's offered to non-Spanish speaking immigrants.
So I'll kind of address that. The organization I'm with, we're in Southwest Houston, very diverse organization. We're actually a refugee resettlement agency. Spanish speakers don't make up a majority of our clientele. I mean, they're a plurality, but they're not a majority. We do see a lot of refugee communities, but I think the key with those communities is they seem to be very insular and tight-knit. And what happens, and you can see it in our trends of, like our naturalization program, we'll go through a period where we're getting a whole bunch of Burmese, and then it'll drop off. Then you get a whole bunch of, Bhutanese, and then it'll drop off. I think what needs to be done more in that is just targeting the communities themselves, which is difficult. For instance, we have a hard time on creating written materials, getting them translated and that sort of thing. We don't have a problem with oral translations, but like if we're wanting to create, to get things translated, it seems to take a longer time because, you're trying to target so many different communities, and it just, again, logistically, it becomes a problem figuring out what languages, how many of what, of each item you print up. But what we find is, again, if you can target a specific group within the refugee community as opposed to refugees as a whole. And it does, it correlates. We're like our citizenship program, again, it tracks, and we look at, like, you'll get a whole bunch of Iraqis, and then it'll go off, and then you get, when you start seeing a few Burmese, it'll spike up. And I think that's just the nature of the way those communities are. And I don't know if there's another solution. I think with a lot of the written materials and the screening things, it's just so many languages, it's hard to pinpoint certain languages. Like you mentioned Liberia, even that, you have dialects and everything else that becomes, difficult. So.
But you can have that translated in Somali and Burmese. Like there's enough people around. Like I've done this before. I got my PhD. I worked with translation, and I did this. So I think that's. I'm not sure that's. I'm not.
No.
fine.
I would say that there is a lot that is going on. I think it's important to raise the issue. I think awareness is one of the biggest issues, but I know that Matthew's tools, and he can speak to this, are multilingual. Clinics resources, including our screening tool, I believe is in 5 languages. And it is something we're always thinking about. It's the same thing with the NAC that Sarah was talking about. There are numerous resources in multiple languages. Clinics affiliates are of multiple ethnic groups, some specifically targeting certain ethnic groups, and some kind of will serve anyone and everyone. But we have to be vigilant, because we know that in DACA, the numbers of Asians and Africans were lower than you would have expected based on expectations, and I want to say it's a little bit of a wake up for kind of the advocacy community overall, trying to look and figure out what are the factors playing into that and how can we do things. But I would say that there's much more going on than you're hearing about. And I think it maybe sometimes gets a little sloppy just to use Spanish as a shortcut when it's actually much wider than that.
Yeah, and if I could just add really briefly, you raise a really important point, and I think that's something that, as Jean mentioned, that we've tried really hard to learn from experiences around DACA, having really low application rates for Asian Pacific Islander folks, for folks from other non-Latino countries and even Central American countries. There was really a perception, California has a very large Asian Pacific Islander population, and there was really a perception among a lot of groups that I think because of the way some outreach was done, there was a perception, oh, well, that's just for, DACA's just for Latinos, or DACA's just for Mexicans. And so there's been a real concerted effort in the intervening years to do a lot more targeted outreach. My project, Ready California, after the Supreme Court non-decision made DAPA not an option, we really doubled down on trying to get folks who had not yet applied for DACA but were eligible, especially those from underserved and underrepresented communities, to apply, and worked with collaboratives throughout the state in sort of targeted campaigns, like to Koreans in Orange County or the Filipino community in San Diego, et cetera, to figure out, well, what actually works for outreach to this particular population, and what do gatekeepers and leaders from these communities say actually works, and try to document some of that so that when we do have someday some larger affirmative benefit program, we can apply those lessons and really make sure that we're reaching out to everyone.
And I think just really concretely, there's a challenge around resources. It's actually really challenging to work with volunteer translators and interpreters in a sustainable way. And my wife is a translator interpreter, but to get high quality translations reviewed by multiple people who have legal expertise, even if you're trying to make that more plain language, is not trivial, and but it does cost money and require resources. And I think for a lot of groups, it's just unless they're serving a particular population, if it's not a population that they're serving, there's no kind of benefit to investing in translations in multiple languages, either when that group is English language proficient, which is true of many groups, or where there's not a significant population of those folks within their service area that would make it make sense to invest those resources.
to jump back really quickly to the screening issue. So there's several of us here from basically the principal legal service provider agency in St. Louis. And we have, I think, done a really good job about like DAPA screenings when that was a thing, and power of attorney workshops. And I think there's been this hesitancy to do more with screening type things because of capacity. Like we already have these exploding caseloads between the half a dozen nonprofit attorneys that we have in our small city. And so if we screen all these people and identify all these people eligible for relief and then have nowhere to send them or nothing to do. So, I mean, beyond developing better, like we don't have a strong pro bono culture within our immigration bar. And so like having those folks take on cases has not been a thing. We've worked to develop, you know, to train up non-immigration attorneys about who can take pro bono asylum cases, for example, or things like that. But beyond those sort of traditional ideas, any creative things to do in regards to capacity after implementing some good like screening type?
Well, I think the first thing is to get over the idea that screening isn't a service in and of itself and that you have to onboard those clients, because that's just not true and it's not going to get us where we need to be. But I also think that there are ways to think about how you frame those services. I mean, it's just not the case that not everyone can afford a private attorney, and if they know that there's actually a benefit that's available to them with reasonable certainty, maybe they'll make it a priority to save to, you know, pay for that private attorney. I do think that there are opportunities around better engaging pro bono volunteers. We just launched a campaign called Stand With Immigrants that's trying to do that nationally. But there are challenges there. Obviously, that takes resources and effort. And I think the first step is to find resources to fund a volunteer coordinator. That without that, if you're relying on your staff attorneys or in many cases executive director or other folks who have other jobs to do, it's going to be hard to have that impact. And so I think one of the most important things organizations can do is to just invest in that position, and likely in, you know, a year or two, it's going to return the investment multiple times because you'll actually have someone focused.
Can I ask a quick follow-up question? Just like nitty-gritty, do you know of anyone or any of you that have done like in like a workshop form, like a screening type thing as you send people away? Like you said, it's not necessarily with the promise that like, okay, our nonprofit will, or this group of nonprofits will take you on. Is there like a good standard, or anybody who would in the crowd either would have a model to share? Maybe someone could just find me afterwards, but we would be happy to talk kind of like, we've heard a lot of great things in these last couple of days, and I think now we're all like, so now what can we do and what can we implement? So thinking more about that would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, I would say that was exactly the issue that the affiliates that we funded to do the screening. So we were giving them just a little bit of money, $6,000 to $10,000 to screen, however, you know, a couple hundred clients each, which isn't money to take on representation. And so what every client walked out the door with, they went to a Know Your Rights screening, so they got a lot of information about that. And then they would walk out with a sheet of paper saying, I think you may be eligible for this form of relief or these forms of relief, and then a list of referrals. So they knew coming in that they weren't going to get representation, and that obviously that's awkward because people want it. But they did, yeah. So you can check out our website. All those resources are available.
I also think it's really important to be candid with folks about what to expect from nonprofit legal service providers. You know, most people that go to nonprofit legal service providers don't get representation. They may get some form of service, but simply don't have the capacity to serve everyone. So I think programs have started to, when they're doing these sort of screening workshops, also talk about, you know, what types of cases they may accept, that they often have priorities around particular populations or types of cases, and just prepare folks so that, because when we did focus groups with non-traditional advocates like faith-based workers, like librarians, they were all incredibly frustrated with these lists of nonprofit providers that every time they told them to reach out to, they'd call them up and they would get nowhere with that request. And obviously that's not a universal experience, but it was enough of an experience that it came up many, many times as we did focus groups with groups that are trying to get folks connected with nonprofit providers.
And I just was thinking there's actually some potential funding opportunities with the Mexican consulate right now. They have some money in different jurisdictions, I don't know which ones, but it might be worth it to reach out to them. I think they have some for like Know Your Rights and screenings, particularly for citizenship, as part of like a dual citizenship program of theirs. Another one could be like a partnership with churches. Like we've heard a lot from churches that are interested and want to help, and maybe one way is asking for money to pay for some of private attorneys if you have an active immigration bar, assuming that you have that and not nonprofits. And if you do have private immigration attorneys, maybe trying to develop a low bono system with them. But when you talk about referrals, and giving them a list of referrals, is it a list of private attorney referrals? And if no.
Well,
Because if so, I guess I'm just wondering, one, how those are selected, and two, if you've had any like issues with the greater private bar in giving a small list of providers.
Right. So great question. The referrals, it's all done by local area. I mean, people know their own communities best, and many of them did do local nonprofits that they knew would take cases. I think Matthew's point is very important. There's no point in giving referrals to people if they're going to go somewhere and not get help, but also attorneys that they've had a relationship with, and it's often an attorney who's willing to take a case at a slightly lower rate, and that the agencies, local nonprofits, feel comfortable with. But also your point about the Mexican consulates is great. All 50 of the consulates got funding to help work on these issues, and some of them are looking at funding things like screenings, particularly in the South and rural California, but the Mexican consulates around the country have been willing to pay for fees and services, and so it is really good if you don't have relationships with them already to build them. And I would take that same idea with other consulates. I don't know that they've had funding, but I think the other consulates are also great partners.
My name is Celestine Johnson. I am the executive director for a newly found organization called C.I. Johnson Immigration Law and Services, and this is a non-profit organization based here in Houston, Texas. This is a very useful conference. First of all, I must comment because it's helpful to me to learn what those of you who are more experienced in this field and have been in the field for a very long time have been doing. So I learned something today a lot, especially from the legal folks on the panel. My question is, when you have a statistic of more than 1.5 million immigrants who are eligible, who may be eligible for naturalization but do not know about it, and you are doing some kind of a charity work to help them get through the naturalization process, do you think about the fee for those who are really poor, who can't afford it? Are there any provisions to pay the fee for them, or are they required to pay the immigration fee themselves? How does it work with you?
So there's two types of fees, and just to clarify, the 1.5 million is for benefits across the board, not just naturalization. But there are two ways. There are two types of fees. One are many nonprofit legal service providers across the country charge nominal fees to clients to provide the service, and that's a way that helps them to be sustainable, and it's always subsidized by other types of funding. And then there's the application fee to the U.S. government. So in two contexts, in naturalization and DACA, there are some good examples of community lenders that have partnered with organizations to find ways to get them small dollar loans to be able to pay the fees. I think those are the two areas I'm aware that it's sort of taken off in different places. But then there's also community-based institutions that do provide small dollar loans independent of an application fee, and so that's another area to potentially look at. Obviously, you want to look at the lender and what the rates are and make sure that it's a trusted lender, but you could form a relationship with a community bank or other lender and explain to them that your clients or the communities you're serving are struggling to pay application fees, and whether you could develop a program or messaging or folks to come in and talk to folks about helping with those fees.
Yeah. My second remark is not really a question, but it's some kind of a contribution, relying on the other lady's question. She asked a question that really raised eyebrows about immigration laws that you've been commenting on all day. That is more directed towards the Hispanic community, and she's kind of not hearing anything about the African community, where they fall into in all this. And I was thinking about that as well, because I know that most of the people in the African community mostly go to private attorneys, and most of them can't really afford those private attorneys because they are really expensive. And along the line somewhere, a lot of them get so frustrated. And my concern actually came in when I realized that a lot of African women who are going through immigration process have been so frustrated that, to the extent that the mortality rate is increasing among immigrant women. So I got more concerned about that. And so what my organization intends to do, which we have really not started doing in full force, because we are still looking forward to how we can be supported to carry on with what we're doing, is to reach out to these women who, for one reason or the other, can't really come forward or speak for themselves, and to let them know that there is a help like this available for them. They should come forward. And needing help is not deportation, because we will try to let them understand that we are not out to victimize the victims. We are out to help the victims. And that's the reason why we are set to reach out to them and invite them to come forward with their unique cases, so that we know where we can step in to help them. But our concern is, how to get them out.
Sure. Thank you, Celeste.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right, and there are a lot of good examples. I mean, I really want to make sure there are people in here who are very cognizant of the need to serve many, many ethnic communities, people from all over the world, and do really phenomenal jobs doing that. And again, it never hurts to remind ourselves of that. So please join me one more time thanking this terrific panel.